Nora Callahan didn't plan on crying in public, but here she was, blinking back tears into a hotel cocktail she hadn't even touched. She sat alone at the boutique hotel bar in downtown Chicago, too nice for her budget, but she needed somewhere quiet to think. The soft jazz, the velvet bar stools, the flickering candlelight on the marble bar, it was all too elegant for her mood. "Bad date?" a deep voice asked beside her. She turned, startled. The man next to her was tall, mid-30s maybe, dressed in a dark blazer and a crisp white shirt with the top button undone. His jawline was sharp, his eyes an intense gray blue, and he wasn't smiling, he looked genuinely curious. "Worse," Nora muttered, brushing a tear off her cheek. "Bad day. Like got fired and dumped in the same hour kind of day." The man let out a low whistle. "That's rough, want to talk about it." She stared at him. "You don't even know me," he shrugged. "You're here, I'm here, and I'm pretty good at listening." Nora exhaled, half laughing, half exhausted. "I'm Nora, Preston," he said, holding out his hand. She shook it, noticing how warm and steady his grip was. "You always hang out in hotel bars listening to sad women." "Only on Tuesdays," he said, his tone dry. She laughed, the sound surprising her. "It's Monday." "Then I'm early," she smiled, and for the first time all day her chest didn't feel quite so tight. They talked for hours. Nora told him about the small marketing agency where she'd worked for 3 years until her boss randomly called her in this morning and said they were downsizing. Then she went home and found her boyfriend of 2 years packing. "He said I wasn't ambitious enough," she said, rolling her eyes. Preston listened, really listened. He didn't ask dumb questions or try to fix it. He just ordered her a new drink, something fruity with a sugar rim, and shared stories from his own life that were funny and self-deprecating. He said he worked in corporate, vaguely, and traveled a lot. But he was careful not to talk too much about himself. He kept the spotlight on her, and Nora found herself opening up more than she usually did with strangers. "You know what's wild?" she said, finishing off a bite of the crème brûlée they were now sharing. "I don't even know what I'm doing with my life. I thought I had a plan. Job, relationship, maybe a dog, but now I'm 30, jobless, single, and living with a roommate who still labels her almond milk." Preston laughed. "Well, I'm 36, single, and I accidentally bought a $6 million property I've never set foot in." Nora blinked. "You what?" "Long story, bad assistant, worse communication, but now I own a vineyard in Napa I've never seen." She stared at him. "Wait, are you serious?" He nodded, amused. "But you said you're in corporate." "I am. You own a vineyard." "I do." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you rich?" Instead of answering, he leaned in slightly. "Does it matter?" She tilted her head. "No. Just curious." He smiled, but didn't offer anything else. By midnight, the bar was nearly empty. The jazz had faded into soft lounge music, and Nora's cheeks hurt from laughing. She looked over at him, her heart weirdly light. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "I have to figure out my life tomorrow." Preston stood with her, placing a hand gently on her lower back as they walked toward the elevator bank. "Can I see you again?" he asked as they reached the lobby. She hesitated. "I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow, let alone—" "I get it," he said quickly. "It's been a weird day, but I'd like to see you again, no pressure." She looked up at him. His eyes were steady, kind, and she felt something warmth, curiosity, a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, I'd like that." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and handed her a business card. It wasn't flashy, just his full name, Preston Raines, and a number. "I don't have a card," she said, laughing. "But I'll call." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hope you do." Nora turned and walked toward the elevator. She didn't look back. But Preston stood there long after she was gone, staring at the elevator doors with a look on his face like he'd just been hit by something he didn't see coming. He hadn't planned to stop at the bar tonight. He'd only come down because his board meeting ran late and he needed a break from his penthouse suite upstairs. But then she was there sitting alone, eyes red, and something about her had pulled him in, and now he couldn't stop thinking about her. He pulled out his phone not to text but to check something. The boutique hotel was one of the properties under his company's umbrella, Raines Holdings, a fact he hadn't mentioned. Yet, he didn't want her to like him for the money, and for the first time in years, Preston felt something real. He wanted to know her, he wanted to see her again, and he had a feeling he would. Nora stood outside the gallery, staring up at the arched glass doors as snow flurried lightly around her. She hadn't expected to step back into the working world so soon, but 2 days ago, she'd gotten a call from a woman named Liana who ran a private design firm and needed help curating a client event at a contemporary art space. Temporary contract, decent pay, unfamiliar world, but she'd said yes. Inside, the space was flooded with light, the white walls crisp and clean against splashes of bold, abstract canvases. The scent of fresh paint and citrus-scented cleaner lingered in the air, and Nora was immediately aware of how underdressed she felt in her thrifted wool coat and scuffed boots. Still, she walked in with her shoulders squared. "You must be Nora," a voice called from the far end of the gallery. Liana was tall and brisk, dressed in a structured navy pantsuit and heels that echoed across the polished concrete floor. She handed Nora a sleek black folder without slowing her pace. "You're in charge of coordinating the artist liaison, confirming the wine sponsor, and managing the RSVP list. The client is arriving at 6 for a walkthrough." "Don't be late." Nora followed her through the gallery, absorbing information at lightning speed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fast-paced, creative, and most importantly, it distracted her from the mess of her personal life. By 5:30, she had memorized the layout, confirmed the floral delivery, and called the violin duo to verify their set list. She was halfway through alphabetizing the guest list when a familiar voice caught her attention. "I didn't expect to see you here." She turned sharply. Preston stood near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets, looking at her like she'd pulled the air from the room. Nora blinked. "Wait, you're the client," he nodded once. "Liana's firm handles all my company's branding events." "I usually don't bother with the walkthroughs, but his eyes held hers. I made an exception." Nora's brain scrambled, catching up. "Your company?" "Raines Holdings," he said. "We're hosting the event here next week." "It's a launch for a new lifestyle brand we're investing in." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "So, you're my boss's client." He gave her a small, unreadable smile. "More or less." There was a beat of silence, thick with 1,000 new implications. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "The other night, I mean, if I'd known, I'm glad you didn't," he said. "You were real with me." She looked down at the folder in her hands. "This complicates things." "Only if we let it," she glanced up. "So what do? "We work," he said, "professionally. And after that, maybe we see what happens." "Preston, I'm not saying anything changes right now," he added, "but I'd like to keep talking when it's appropriate." She nodded slowly. "Okay, good." He stepped back, looking around. "Show me what you've got planned." They did the walkthrough together, Nora pointing out the lighting placements, the reception table layout, and the artist installation wall. She kept her tone professional, but her heart was beating far too fast. Preston listened intently, asked questions, and never once pulled rank. When they finished, he lingered by the entrance. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "You belong in this world." "I'm still figuring that out," she replied. He hesitated. "You know, I wasn't planning to come tonight." "But I'm glad I did." She met his gaze. "So am I." He nodded once, then turned and walked out into the snow. The next morning, Nora arrived early to the gallery to prep for a supplier meeting and found a small white box waiting for her on the reception table. No note. Just her name written in clean, bold handwriting. Inside was a pair of black Italian leather heels, sleek, elegant, and utterly out of her price range. And beneath them, a card, for the next step forward, no signature, just that. She stared at the gift, stunned for a long minute. Logical, practical Nora wanted to send them back. But something inside her, something braver, slipped them on instead. That afternoon, as she crossed the gallery floor in those heels, people looked at her differently. Straighter posture, clearer voice. She felt like she belonged. The night of the event arrived fast. The gallery transformed into a glowing wonderland of soft lights, minimalist centerpieces, and curated soundscapes. Guests arrived in sleek coats and silk dresses, sipping champagne and admiring the art. Preston entered 30 minutes after the start, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that fit him like it was custom-made, which she realized it probably was. He didn't approach her immediately. Instead, he made his rounds, speaking with guests and investors, always at ease, always in control. But every so often, his eyes found hers across the room. When the client toast was called, he stepped up to the mic. "I won't keep you from the wine," he began, drawing a ripple of laughter, "but I do want to say this tonight represents more than a brand launch. It's about vision. And the people who bring it to life." He looked directly at Nora. "Some of the most important contributions to this evening came from people you haven't met, people working behind the scenes who show up, adapt, and elevate everything they touch." Nora felt her throat tighten. After the toast, he approached her by the window where she was checking the lighting cues. "You handled this flawlessly," he said. "I had help." "No, you didn't, not really." He hesitated. "You're talented, Nora. You shouldn't be working freelance gigs just to stay afloat." She folded her arms. "You don't even know what I want." "Then tell me." His voice was low, serious. She looked away. "I want to build something. I want to matter." "You already do," he said. They stood silently for a moment, the buzz of the crowd behind them, the city lights glinting through the windows. "I'm flying to Paris next week," he said finally. "There's a summit. Investors, designers, media. I need someone on the ground I can trust, someone with taste, someone who sees what others don't." She laughed softly. "Are you offering me a plane ticket?" "I'm offering you a job," she blinked. "Temporary contract," he added. "Same as here, you'd be paid fairly, treated as part of the team, no strings." "No strings," she echoed, unsure if she believed that. He looked at her, eyes steady. "You don't owe me anything, but I see something in you. And I'd be a fool not to ask." She hesitated, her heart pounding, then she nodded. "I'll go." His entire expression shifted, still composed, but something in his shoulders relaxed. "Good," he said softly. "We leave Sunday." The jet touched down at Charles de Gaulle just after dawn, the sky outside a pale wash of lavender and frost. Nora sat rigid in the butter-soft leather seat, her breath catching as the flight attendant offered her a delicate porcelain cup of espresso. Across from her, Preston reviewed a stack of sleek, silver-embossed folders, his expression unreadable. She hadn't slept. Not because the recliner wasn't comfortable, it was too comfortable. But her mind had been a kaleidoscope of what-ifs and whys since he'd picked her up in a chauffeured car just hours earlier, his only words. "Hope you brought something dramatic to wear." "First time in Paris?" he asked now, eyes lifting from the documents. She nodded, wrapping her fingers around the tiny cup. "I never thought I'd leave the country, let alone like this." "You'll fit in," he said simply. "You have an eye, the rest is instinct. Instinct doesn't usually come with designer luggage and a private jet." He didn't answer that. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim black envelope. "There's a gala tonight. You'll need this." Inside was an invitation edged in gold foil, written in French. Beneath it, a separate card bore her name and a time for a fitting at some place called Maison de Vienne. "I don't speak French," she said. He leaned back. "You won't need to. They speak success." The fitting took place in a sunlit Parisian atelier where the walls were lined with silks and soft-spoken seamstresses bustled around her like she was royalty. The dress they chose shimmered like moonlight, its back dipping dangerously low, its neckline bold without being vulgar. She stared at herself in the mirror, stunned by what she saw. "She is meant to be seen," the tailor whispered to one of the assistants, unaware Nora could hear. By evening, she stood across from the Grand Palais Garnier, its towering columns glowing under the warm lights of waiting cameras. A sleek car pulled up beside her, its door opening as Preston stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks. He paused when he saw her, his gaze holding hers for a beat too long. "You look lethal," he said. "So do you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. They walked past flashing bulbs and murmured greetings, his hand brushing the small of her back only once, but it was enough. Inside, the ballroom was all crystal and velvet, the kind of opulence that vibrated in the air. Guests clinked glasses and murmured in accents from around the globe, and Nora felt the weight of 100 eyes, not all of them kind. "Who is she?" someone whispered behind them as they passed. Preston leaned in, Ignore them, they're just angry I didn't bring another heiress. Do you usually? Only when I'm bored, and are you bored now? His lips twitched. Terrified, they moved through the room with ease, and he introduced her only once to a man named Henry who looked like he owned half of France. Preston didn't give her a title, just her name, and that told her everything. She wasn't a prop, she was a choice. Later, as the orchestra played and the crowd spilled onto the marble terrace, Preston guided her to a quiet corner overlooking the Seine. The city stretched below them, golden and endless. I should have told you sooner, he said, voice low. About who I am. What I do? Why didn't you? Because when I met you, you weren't looking for anything, and I wasn't used to being looked at that way, without calculation. She turned to face him. And now I don't want to lose that. A breeze tugged at her earrings, and she looked down at the river, struggling to find steady ground. I don't know what this is, Preston. I don't even know if I'm supposed to be here. You are, he said firmly. You're exactly where you should be. She met his eyes, and for the first time she believed him. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the space between them pulsed with unspoken things. Later, back at the hotel, sweet hers, not his, a box waited on the bed. Inside was a silk notebook embossed with her initials and a note tucked between the pages for your ideas. Because I see them even when you don't, no signature. She pressed it to her chest, breath catching. In the morning, she woke to an itinerary slid under her door. Meetings. Showroom visits, a press brunch. She wasn't just tagging along, she was expected, and she rose to meet it. Each day brought more, introductions to photographers, stylists, and consultants. Preston never hovered, but he always checked in. Sometimes with a glance across the room, sometimes with a hand on her shoulder as they left an event. And every time it grounded her. 3 days in, she was seated beside him at her rooftop luncheon with the heads of a luxury fashion house when one of them leaned forward and asked, "Where did you find her, Preston? She doesn't flinch like the others." "She wasn't found," he said, without looking at her. She arrived. That night, as they sat in the back of a car sliding through the moonlit streets, Nora finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Why me?" He didn't answer immediately. The car slowed at her red light, the glow washing over them. "Because when you looked at me," he said slowly, "you didn't see a brand or a paycheck or a headline. You saw a man sitting next to you in a quiet bar, and for once I wanted to be just that." She looked at him, the city reflected in his eyes. "I still do," he added. She reached for his hand, and this time she didn't pull away. He smiled, not because he'd won, but because she had chosen. Nora sat near the window of the suite, legs tucked beneath her as the final flakes of Parisian snow melted against the glass. The summit had ended hours ago, and the silence that followed the whirlwind of meetings and galas felt almost disorienting. She hadn't seen Preston since the closing dinner, where he'd been surrounded by executives and cameras, his face carved in the kind of still calm that came from decades of power. He hadn't come looking for her afterward. She hadn't gone looking for him either. But now, as the morning light spilled across the marble floors and her suitcase remained untouched in the corner, Nora felt the tug of something unfinished. Not between them, not exactly, but something deeper. A choice. There was a knock. She opened the door to find a hotel staff member holding a small black envelope. "No return address," he said in accented English. "Left at the front desk for you personally." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single line, written in Preston's precise, measured handwriting, Salon de Verre. Noon, she glanced at the clock. 11:38, she didn't stop to ask questions. The Salon de Verre was on the top floor of the hotel, a glass-walled conservatory overlooking the river. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat. Preston stood at the far end of the room, alone. No assistants, no partners, just him, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. She walked toward him slowly. "You wanted to see me," she said. "I needed to," he corrected. She stopped a few feet away. "Why here?" "Because I've tried every other way to say this, and none of them felt right." She waited. "I'm not good at letting people in, Nora. I've spent years building things, companies, brands, walls. But that night in Chicago, when you looked at me like I was just a man sitting next to you, something cracked. and every moment since has made it harder to pretend I'm not already in too deep." Her chest tightened, but she said nothing. "I brought you to Paris because I believed in your vision," he continued. "But I kept you close because I wanted to, not as a client, not as a mentor, as a man who's never met anyone like you. Preston, I know the timing is impossible, and I know I didn't make this easy. But I won't walk away from this if there's even a chance you feel the same." She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "What makes you think I'd give up everything I've just started building to fall into someone else's world? I'm not asking you to fall into mine," he said. "I'm offering to build something new, with you, not instead of what you want alongside it." Her eyes searched his. "And what happens when the curiosity fades? When I'm no longer the woman who surprised you in a hotel bar? Then I'll still be the man who never forgot what it felt like to be seen," he said. "Because you didn't just surprise me, Nora, you changed me." She took a breath, sharp and cold. "You're not the man I met that night anymore." "No," he agreed. "Because of you," her voice caught, but before she could speak again, he stepped back and pulled something small from his coat pocket. It was a key, simple, silver. "This is for the studio space on the South Loop. Corner building, top floor, it's yours if you want it. No strings, just a place to make something of your own." She stared at it, heart pounding. "Why?" "Because I meant what I said. I see your ideas, and I want the world to see them too." Nora stepped forward slowly. "And what about you? What about me? If I take the key, if I stay in Chicago and build that space, what happens to this?" He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against hers. "Then I stay too, where you are." Her hand closed around the key, and he let his fall to his side. "I don't want Paris," she whispered. "Not right now. I want late nights and messy sketches and a neighborhood coffee shop that knows my name. Then that's what we'll have." "And what are we, Preston?" He stepped forward, so close she could see the flicker of hope in his eyes. "We're a beginning." The kiss was soft at first, careful, but then her arms wound around his neck and he pulled her in like he'd been waiting his whole life. The glass walls around them blurred with the city beyond, and for a moment there was no Paris, no past, no pressure, just breathe and warmth and the impossible feeling of falling into place. Later that night, they walked the cobblestone streets together, not as boss and contractor, not as billionaire and underdog, but as two people who had found something rare in a world constantly rushing past it. Back in Chicago, months later, the studio opened with Nora's name on the front window and a line of clients already waiting to fill the space. Preston didn't hover. He showed up late on Fridays with takeout and stories from boardrooms she'd never set foot in, and she told him about lighting angles and color palettes and what it felt like to finally wake up every day with purpose. They didn't move in together. Not right away. That came later after a dinner on the rooftop of the same boutique hotel where they'd first met, when he turned in his seat, pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and said, "This time I'm not just offering a job or a key, I'm offering everything." She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. "To all of it." And when the snow fell outside the windows, just like it had that first night, she kissed him again, this time knowing exactly who he was, and knowing she'd never want anyone else. Nora adjusted the collar of her linen blouse and stepped into the gallery's new annex, the scent of fresh paint and mineral light filtering through the tall windows. It was her own space now, finally, and every inch of it bore her design. Concrete floors softened by woven rugs, locally made ceramics lining walnut shelves, and sketches clipped onto wire frames that traced the evolution of her first curated line. Minimal, purposeful, honest. She didn't need to look at her reflection to know her face had changed. There was a new steadiness beneath the surface, the kind that came from doing something on her own terms and not apologizing for it. "I thought this was supposed to be your day off," came Preston's voice from the doorway, amused but unmistakably warm. She didn't turn. "It is." But I couldn't stop thinking about the lighting on the west wall. The shadows were too sharp after noon. He stepped into the space with 2 coffees in hand. "You're the only person I know who could call harsh shadows a crisis. You say that like it's a bad thing. I say that like I'm very aware I'm dating a perfectionist with impeccable taste. She took the cup from his hand, their fingers brushing briefly, and sipped. "What's your excuse for being here? Don't you have a meeting with the tech board today?" "I do, at 4. Which gives me exactly 3 hours to remind you that you do in fact have a life outside of gallerist duties. I'll believe that when I see it." He walked toward the window, glancing out at the line forming across the street. "That's for you, isn't it?" She joined him at the glass. A group of people stood outside the new storefront they'd opened next to the gallery. It was Nora's idea, an incubator space for first-time designers. Preston had offered to fund it. She'd declined. He'd invested instead, quietly, without asking for credit. They had both agreed it would never carry his name. "They're here for the viewing," she said. "First rotation opens at noon. You're going to be big, Nora." "I don't need to be big, I just want to be right." He turned to her. "You already are." She didn't answer, but he could see it in her expression, the way her eyes softened, the tension in her shoulders eased. The way she no longer second-guessed her place in the world. They didn't need declarations every day. Their rhythm had shifted, no longer grand gestures and stolen glances, but quiet routines and fierce loyalty. She still worked late. He still flew out for board meetings and international launches, but they always came back to each other. Later that afternoon, they stood together at the ribbon cutting. Nora wore a navy jumpsuit, understated and elegant, her hair pulled back in a knot that revealed the gold earrings Preston had given her after her first solo design went into production. He didn't stand beside her on the makeshift stage. He watched from the back like he always did when it was her moment, when the crowd dispersed and the first guests filtered into the space. He found her again in the back office. She was organizing a tray of wine glasses, her fingers moving with the kind of focus that made his chest tighten. "Come with me," he said. She paused. "Now, where?" "No questions, just trust me." She narrowed her eyes but followed him outside. A car waited at the curb, not his usual black town car, but a vintage convertible, white with red leather seats. She blinked. "Where did you find this?" "Let's just say I've been planning this for a while." They drove through the city, wind in their hair, Nora's laughter trailing behind them at every unexpected turn. He didn't tell her where they were going, and she didn't ask again. It wasn't until they pulled into the gates of a quiet property on the edge of the lake that she realized, the vineyard, the one he'd mentioned just once all those weeks ago. The accidental purchase, the one he'd never visited. She stepped out slowly, eyes taking in the sun-warmed fields, the rows of bare vines waiting for spring, the renovated farmhouse glinting in the distance. "You kept it," she whispered. "I didn't know why I did at the time. But now I do." She walked toward the edge of the vineyard, hands trailing along the fence. "It's beautiful, it's yours, if you want it." She turned. "I've already transferred the deed," he said. "The land, the house, even the permits, all in your name. I don't want anything in return. No expectations, just, I wanted to give you a place that's untouched by everything, a place that's only ever been yours." She took a breath, deep and steady. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Preston. I'm not trying to." "Then why all this?" "Because I love you." The words landed between them, quiet and unshakable. "I've loved you since the moment you looked at me like I was just a man in a bar and not someone worth Googling," he continued. "And every day since has only made it harder not to say it." She stepped forward, closing the space between them. "I love you too," she said softly. "Not because of the vineyard or the studio or the jet, but because when everything fell apart, you saw me before I did." He reached for her hand. "Say you'll stay." "I was never going anywhere." They kissed beneath the fading sun, the wind rustling through the vines and the world, for once, perfectly still. 2 years later, the vineyard bloomed with wildflowers between the rows, and the farmhouse had been transformed into a creative retreat. Artists, designers, and writers came from all over to stay for a week, sometimes a month, living simply and working freely. Nora oversaw every detail, from the color of the guest room walls to the books stacked in the library. She didn't run it for profit. It wasn't about that. Preston flew in every Friday night. He never stayed in the city anymore. He'd moved most of his operations to Chicago, keeping only what was necessary in New York. The rest he delegated or let go, One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting a golden glow across the fields, Nora walked barefoot across the patio, a glass of red wine in hand. She found him reading beneath the pergola, sleeves rolled to his elbows, shirt untucked, glasses on. She curled into the seat beside him. 12 guests this week, she said. One of them's composing music in the barn. Remind me again what I'm doing with my life. You're funding the future of art. He glanced over the rim of his glasses. And what are you doing, living it? They sat in silence, the sky streaked with violet and copper, the scent of lavender and earth rising from the ground. He reached for her hand. Marry me, she didn't blink. Now, right now. There was no ring, no speech, just a question. She smiled. I'll need shoes. No, you won't. They walked barefoot into the field, the grass cool beneath their feet. One of the guests, a former opera singer, had a violin, and when she saw them, she began to play. Another guest followed with an old camera. Someone whispered excitedly, and chairs were pulled together in a lopsided row. They said their vows as the stars emerged one by one. There was no officiant, no papers, just promises. Later, as they lay in bed with the window open to the night breeze, Nora curled into his chest. What now? She whispered. We wake up, he said, and do it all over again, together, and they did.